Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The sun beat down harshly on the dusty streets of Jamestown, Accra, as billionaire Chuka MBA stepped out of his black SUV, flanked by bodyguards and assistants. It wasn't a formal business trip, just a quick inspection of a local property he was considering investing in. Dressed in casual designer wear and sunglasses, he tried to blend in with the crowd as much as someone with his stature could. His eyes scanned the street out of habit, not truly looking for anything. Then it happened. Across the road, near a rickety wooden stand, a young barefoot boy no older than 10 darted past, holding a tray of roasted plantain. His clothes were torn, his knees scarred with dirt and bruises. But it wasn't the boy's poverty that held Chuka frozen in place. It was what gleamed on the child's wrist, a bracelet. A very specific bracelet, gold-plated with a lion head pendant and a deep crack on the side. It was unmistakable. For a moment, Chuka forgot where he was. Time collapsed on itself as his mind was dragged violently into the past. That bracelet, he hadn't seen it in nearly 15 years. He had given it to Amma. He remembered the night clearly now, how the moonlight fell softly on her tear-streaked face, how he had wrapped the bracelet around her wrist and whispered, "I'll come back for you. This is a promise." Back then, he was just a hopeful Nigerian student in South Africa, hungry for success, filled with dreams and fire. Amma had been the calm to his storm, the Ghanaian girl who made his tiny student apartment feel like a palace. They had shared laughter, struggle, meals of instant noodles, and midnight talks. She had taught him Chui. He taught her how to cook egusi. When he was forced to return to Nigeria, they cried together. He had sworn to return. He never did. The boy had disappeared into the crowd, but Chuka's body moved on instinct. He dashed across the street, ignoring the shouts of his aides and the blaring horns of oncoming vehicles. He didn't care that he was sweating, didn't care that people were starting to recognize him. He moved through the market like a man possessed. Each stall blurred past, fishmongers, cloth sellers, noisy children, until he reached the corner where he had last seen the boy. The plantain stand was there. An older woman was fanning the hot coals while the boy stood beside her, smiling. There it was again, the bracelet, glinting in the sunlight as he reached for a stick of roasted plantain. Chuka took a slow step forward, his throat tightening. "Where did you get that bracelet?" he asked hoarsely, pointing. The woman looked up, startled. The boy's smile faded. The next few seconds would change everything Chuka thought he knew about his past and about himself. Years ago, before the wealth, before the fame, before the helicopters and board meetings, there was a dusty room in Johannesburg and the smell of rain outside. Chuka was 23, studying on a scholarship, hustling part-time jobs just to afford data and groceries. Amma lived in the apartment below his, a petite Ghanaian girl with deep dimples and quiet eyes that saw everything. They had bumped into each other one morning during a power outage and bonded instantly over their shared frustration with the unreliable utilities. Over time, their friendship bloomed into something deeper, something unspoken and yet undeniable. While other students spent nights partying, Chuka and Amma studied together, shared meals, and dreamed about the future. He told her about Nigeria. She told him about her small family in Cape Coast. She was his peace, his grounding. He didn't have much, but with Amma beside him, he felt rich. One evening, after a particularly stressful exam week, they sat on the rooftop of their apartment watching the sunset. Chuka had been quiet all day, unusually withdrawn. Amma noticed. "You got the call, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded. His father was sick back home, and Chuka needed to return to Nigeria. There was no telling when, or if, he'd be back. Amma didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, she leaned into his chest and held his hand. That night, they made love for the first time. Slow, sacred, and desperate. In the morning, Chuka slipped off his late grandfather's bracelet, the lion head heirloom passed down through generations of firstborn sons, and gave it to her. "Keep this. It's not just jewelry. It's a promise. When you see me again, I'll be wearing its twin." She had smiled, the kind of smile that wrapped itself around your soul. He kissed her forehead. Then he left. But things spiraled. Back in Nigeria, Chuka's father passed away, and he had to fend for his mother and siblings. He got a job, then a second job. Then luck struck, and his tech idea got funding. In the whirlwind of business pitches, silent investors, Legos traffic betrayals, and breakthroughs, Amma became a memory tucked away like an old song. Bittersweet, but forgotten. He never called. Never wrote. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to return to a life he felt he no longer deserved. What would he tell her? That he had changed? That he didn't know how to face the guilt of abandoning her? So he buried her memory, convinced that someday he'd find the courage. But he never did. And now here he was, staring at her son, a boy who looked so much like him, and wondering how much damage silence could cause. Amma stared at Chuka like a ghost had walked out of her worst nightmares. She stood slowly, her hands trembling from the heat of the coal pot. Her eyes darted from Chuka's face to the bracelet on her son's wrist and back again. "Chuka," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief and hurt. Chuka opened his mouth, but nothing came out. How could he apologize for 15 years of silence in a single moment? How could he explain that he never stopped thinking about her, yet never acted on it? The boy, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, munched on his roasted plantain, watching them both with curiosity. Customers continued walking past, unaware of the emotional storm unfolding in that small corner of the market. Amma picked up the corner of her wrapper to wipe her face. "So you're alive," she said bitterly. "And rich." They sat behind the stall as the sun lowered, and for the first time, Amma told her story. After Chuka left, she waited. Weeks turned to months. She wrote letters, 27 of them, addressed to the university office, to his last known email, even to a Lagos address he had scribbled on her notebook. No reply. She was pregnant and alone. Her parents, already struggling, took her in, but couldn't hide their disappointment. Amma gave birth to Kwami on a rainy night with no power, no doctor, only a neighbor midwife. She tried working, first at a school, then cleaning houses, but nothing lasted. She sold her clothes to feed the baby, then sold jewelry. But she never sold the bracelet. "Because you said it was a promise," she said, her voice trembling. "And I was foolish enough to believe you would keep it." Chuka sat with his head bowed like a child being scolded. He had thought he'd find her someday, under different circumstances. Maybe at a cafe, older and wiser, and they'd share coffee and talk about the past. He never imagined this. The pain etched in her skin, the tiredness in her bones, the quiet resentment in her voice. He tried to explain, but everything sounded like an excuse. The tech startup, his family, the chaos of Lagos life. She listened, but didn't interrupt. When he was done, she looked at him and said, "I didn't need your riches, Chuka. I just needed your presence. I just needed you." And in that moment, Chuka realized that all his billions couldn't buy back the years she spent waiting in vain. And worse, it couldn't undo the suffering of a woman who once believed he was her entire world. The days after Chuka left were some of the darkest of Amma's life. Each morning began with the sound of rejection in her ears, her father's sighs, her mother's muffled sobs, the murmurs from neighbors who suddenly remembered how often Chuka had visited. She was no longer the hopeful girl whose love story transcended borders. She was now that girl who had been abandoned, used, and left with a belly. The shame was as thick as the harmattan dust that covered the slums. But even in that storm of humiliation, Amma never allowed herself to hate Chuka. At first, she believed he was delayed. Maybe his flight was postponed. Maybe there was no internet access. She defended him to her parents, swearing he would return. After all, he gave her the bracelet, his family heirloom. You don't give someone that unless you mean forever. But forever didn't come. Pregnancy was not kind to Amma. Her limbs swelled. Her appetite vanished. The little money she had saved from cleaning jobs went into prenatal checkups she barely understood. She remembered sitting in the government clinic, her fingers tracing the lion head pendant as nurses gave her pamphlets about single motherhood. She gave birth in the most undignified way imaginable, with an oil lantern flickering in the corner, sweat dripping from her brow, and pain tearing through her spine like a knife. But when the nurse handed her the baby and she saw his eyes, she sobbed, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing realization. He looked exactly like Chuka. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the dimple on the left cheek, the narrow nose, even the tiny birthmark on the shoulder. He was a copy of the man who had vanished. Amma named him Kwami, after her late brother. And for years she clawed her way through life like a woman buried alive. She sold second-hand clothes in Makola Market. When that didn't pay enough, she became a nanny. She washed dishes in chop bars, carried buckets for fishmongers, and roasted plantain under the sun until her skin darkened beyond recognition. Every now and then, someone would ask where Kwami's father was. She'd smile tightly and say, "He lives in Lagos." They thought she was delusional. She didn't care. The bracelet remained with Kwami even when they couldn't afford shoes. She would tie it securely around his wrist and whisper, "Someday, your father will see you. He will know." Deep down, she feared he was dead. Or worse, he had moved on. But even in her darkest hours, she never once gave up on the promise of the lion head bracelet, or the man who gave it to her. In Nigeria, the years moved differently for Chuka. His return from South Africa was met with sorrow. His father's death had left a vacuum and a ton of family responsibilities. Chuka, the once dreamy boy in love, hardened. He became focused, calculating, and consumed by the urgency to survive and thrive. It started with freelance tech jobs, web development for churches, designing apps for small companies. Then came the breakthrough. One of his mobile finance solutions gained the attention of a local investor, who funded it with $10,000. That was all Chuka needed. In 2 years, he built PayConnect, an app that revolutionized microtransactions in rural Nigeria. It was the foundation of the empire he'd later be known for. And with each passing success, the noise around him grew louder. Advisors, meetings, boardroom deals, and magazine covers. The past became a fog behind him, one he dared not revisit. He often thought about Amma, in quiet moments in dreams and during his long drives through Lekki and Victoria Island. But every time he tried to draft a message or pick up the phone, fear overtook him. What if she had moved on? What if she hated him? What if she had suffered because of him? The guilt was paralyzing. So he buried her memory beneath work, women, and wealth. He married a successful lawyer named Olana, not out of love, but out of strategy. She was beautiful, brilliant, and respected. Together, they looked like Africa's power couple. They never spoke of Amma, because Olana never knew. Chuka kept that chapter of his life sealed tight, like an old wound under tailored suits and press interviews. And when the topic of children came up and the tests revealed that Olana couldn't conceive, Chuka did not dare to mention the boy he may have fathered in Ghana. Yet, something always felt missing. In all the noise of his success, Chuka began to feel echoes of a hollowness he couldn't explain. He donated to causes, built tech hubs for young developers, gave motivational talks, but none of it soothed the ache. Each time he saw a child with dark eyes and a curious mind, he'd pause. Each time he held a lion pendant in a meeting or saw a woman with Amma's build, he felt haunted. Eventually, he stopped visiting Ghana altogether. It was too painful, too close. Until now. When a random business inspection took him to Accra, he never imagined his past would confront him, not with tears or letters, but with a dusty child wearing the bracelet he thought he'd never see again. And now, everything he had spent years building was shaking beneath the weight of one painful truth. He never went back for the woman who waited. That night, Chuka couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his hotel suite in Accra, the city buzzing beneath him, while his heart thudded like a judge's gavel. The bracelet, that cursed, beautiful bracelet, burned in his mind like a scar. How had it survived? He had almost forgotten he gave it to Amma until he saw it again, wrapped around Kwami's tiny wrist like a reminder from fate. He replayed the look in Amma's eyes over and over again, a mix of recognition, betrayal, and immeasurable pain. No one had ever looked at him like that before. Not even Olana when they argued. Amma's eyes had pierced through his wealth, his reputation, his arrogance. They reminded him of who he was before money complicated everything. And for the first time in years, Chuka wept. Not for what he had lost, but for what he had stolen. Years of a child's life, a woman's peace, and a promise he never kept. The following morning, Chuka told his team he'd be unavailable. He drove himself, unguarded, to the small compound where Amma lived. It was a run-down building with peeling paint and rusted roofing, far from the glassy high-rises he was used to. He stepped out of the car and knocked. Amma opened the door in a faded wrapper, surprise flashing in her eyes. Behind her, Kwami sat on a mat, reading aloud from a worn schoolbook. "Why are you here?" she asked. "To give charity? To feel better?" Chuka shook his head. "No. I want to know him," he said, his voice cracking. "I want to make things right." Amma laughed, but it was dry and joyless. "You think this is one of your contracts, Chuka? That you can fix 15 years with a speech and a check?" He lowered his head. "I don't expect forgiveness. I want to try." Silence stretched between them until Kwami looked up and said, "Mommy, who is that man?" Later that day, while Amma washed clothes outside, Chuka sat with Kwami under a tree. They talked awkwardly, at first, about school, favorite foods, and superheroes. Chuka was stunned by the boy's intelligence. Kwami wanted to be an engineer. "Like the men who fix radios and fridges?" he asked. Chuka smiled. "Yes, but bigger, like buildings and airplanes." The boy's eyes lit up. "I want to fly in one someday." Chuka nodded, suppressing the lump in his throat. "You will." As the afternoon wore on, a strange calm filled Chuka. He didn't know what the future held, whether Amma would ever truly forgive him, or whether Kwami would one day call him father. But he knew one thing: the bracelet was never truly forgotten. It had survived storms, shame, and silence. And now maybe it could become a symbol of something new, not a promise broken, but a bond reborn. The next few days became a haunting rhythm for Chuka. He found himself returning to Amma's compound every afternoon, despite her coldness and guarded presence. She allowed him to sit with Kwami under the mango tree, but rarely joined in their conversations. It was as if she had built a fortress within herself, one that no amount of wealth or charm could penetrate. Chuka brought books, toys, even a brand new tablet, but Amma refused most of it. "He doesn't need your things. He needs your time," she said sharply. The words cut deeper than he expected. For a man used to having problems solved with a wire transfer or a signed deal, being told his wealth was meaningless was jarring. But she was right. The truth was, Chuka wasn't there to flaunt what he had. He was there to recover what he lost, even if he didn't know how. Kwami was the only light in those heavy moments. The boy was sharp, curious, and respectful, though a bit skeptical. "Why do you want to be around me now?" he asked one afternoon, legs folded as he munched on a mango. Chuka was caught off guard. He had no rehearsed speech. "Because I missed out on what matters most," he said truthfully. Kwami didn't reply, but he stared long and hard at Chuka, as if studying the contours of the man who might be his father. There was no mistaking the resemblance. Even Amma could no longer deny it. From the shape of Kwami's ears to the way he scrunched his nose when confused, it was like looking at Chuka 15 years ago. Chuka wanted to say more, to fill in the gaps, but every time he looked at Amma, he felt small. The guilt suffocated him, making each word feel inadequate. Eventually, Amma gave him a folded envelope, one of the letters she had written years ago. The ink was faded, the paper yellowed by time. "I used to think you were dead," she said, eyes hollow. "But I still wrote you. It was how I stayed sane." Chuka took the letter to his hotel and opened it with trembling hands. In it, Amma had poured out her soul, the excitement of her pregnancy, the fear of being alone, the hope that he would return soon. She spoke of the bracelet, how she kissed it every night before bed. And then the letter ended with the line, "You once said a lion never abandons its pride. I hope you haven't become a coward." Chuka held the paper against his chest and cried. He didn't just abandon a woman. He abandoned a life that could have anchored him, a life of meaning. Now, he was chasing a shadow of the man he could have been. Amma sat by the charcoal stove that evening, staring at the orange glow of the embers like it held answers to the questions she never dared ask. Seeing Chuka again had cracked open a wound she had long stitched shut. Her heart wanted to rage, to cry, to slap him for the years she walked alone, carrying his absence. But her pride, forged in years of suffering, refused to show weakness. She didn't want to be that girl anymore, the one who wept over broken promises. She had raised Kwami with dignity, taught him to honor his name, and protected him from the bitterness she carried. But now, the man who caused all her pain was back, not with excuses, but with remorse in his eyes. And it scared her, because no matter how much she wanted to hate him, part of her still remembered the Chuka, who once held her like the world would end if he let go. At night, she lay on her thin mattress beside Kwami, unable to sleep. Her son stirred, murmuring in his dreams, clutching the same lion head bracelet she once wore. Amma blinked back tears. How many times had she told herself to let it go, to sell the bracelet when hunger struck? But she didn't. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the last tangible proof of a love that once felt eternal. She still remembered the day he gave it to her, how his hands shook, how his voice cracked. It wasn't a random gift. It was a vow. And that's what made his absence hurt so much more. Chuka had made her believe she was the one. And then he vanished. Now he stood in front of her again, older, richer, and broken in ways he didn't even realize. She saw it in his eyes, the guilt, the longing, the regret. Amma wasn't sure what to do. She had no intention of rekindling anything. Love wasn't a game of second chances. But she also couldn't deny the bond forming between Chuka and Kwami. It was subtle at first, a shared laugh, a high five, a lesson in chess. But it was growing. Her son, who once asked why he didn't have a father, now had someone who looked at him with admiration and quiet affection. Amma wrestled with the decision every day. Should she allow it? Should she let Chuka stay in their lives? Would it confuse Kwami? Would it hurt him more when Chuka eventually left again? She didn't trust easily anymore. And even though Chuka showed up this time, the years of silence still loomed large. Still, every time she looked at her son's eyes, so full of hope, she wondered, what if this time, the lion keeps his promise? Kwami was the kind of child that made strangers smile. He was sharp without being arrogant, playful but responsible. From a young age, he had learned how to light the charcoal stove, count change at the market, and protect his mother from aggressive customers. He never complained about the lack of toys or electricity. His imagination was his playground. At school, he was the first to volunteer answers, and though other children teased him for his tattered shoes, he always smiled through it. His mother was his hero. He watched her wake before dawn and work late into the night without a single sigh of complaint. He'd often ask her, "Mommy, are we poor?" And she'd answer, "We are not poor, Kwami. We are strong." And that was enough for him, until the man with the deep voice and fancy car showed up, and suddenly, the answers didn't feel so simple anymore. The moment Kwami saw Chuka, something stirred inside him. At first he was cautious. The man looked like those powerful people on TV who didn't belong in their world. But there was something familiar about his face, something in the way he smiled. It wasn't long before Kwami began to ask questions his mother tried hard to avoid. Why does he look like me? Why does he come every day? Why does he know my favorite fruit? He even asked Amma one night, "Is he my uncle?" Amma froze, then said softly, "He's someone who used to be important to me." That answer only deepened his curiosity. Children see more than they say, and Kwami, though young, sensed that the man wasn't just a visitor. He was a missing piece. Over time, Chuka and Kwami began to bond. It was slow, natural, and filled with innocence. They played simple games, shared snacks, and Chuka taught him things no one had, like how to calculate square roots and speak basic Yoruba. Kwami soaked it all in, eager to impress the man he didn't yet know was his father. One day, as they walked together to the store, Kwami suddenly looked up and said, "You know, I wouldn't mind if you were my daddy." Chuka stopped walking. The words hit him harder than any business loss ever had. He crouched beside the boy, unable to speak. Kwami smiled and added, "You're nice. Not like the men Mommy warns me about." And in that moment Chuka knew. He couldn't walk away again. Not now. Not ever. This boy had his blood, his eyes, and now his trust. And for the first time in his life, Chuka felt what it truly meant to be rich. The first time Chuka heard Kwami refer to him as Daddy in front of others, it was like being baptized in equal parts joy and guilt. They were at a small shop where Amma usually bought soap and provisions. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with graying braids, smiled and said, "Your boy looks just like you." Before Chuka could react, Kwami responded, "He's my daddy." The words caught Chuka off guard. Amma, standing nearby, froze with a bag of rice in her hand. She looked at her son, then at Chuka, and turned away without a word. The walk home that day was silent. Not even Kwami's usual chatter could break the tension. That evening, as rain drizzled against the rusty roof, Amma finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but each word was soaked in pain. "Do you know what it felt like to give birth alone, Chuka? To hold your child and have no one there to say, 'Well done'? I used to cry every time he smiled, because I knew you would have loved that smile." Chuka sat on the floor of her room, not on a chair like a visitor, but low to the ground like someone in mourning. "I was selfish," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I got caught up in survival, in proving something to the world. And I forgot the one person who never asked me for anything except love." Amma's eyes welled up with tears, but they didn't fall. "You didn't just forget me," she replied. "You forgot him. You forgot your son. And while you were out there building empires, I was here praying he wouldn't ask why his father never came." Her words dug into him like nails. Every business award, every headline featuring his name, suddenly felt like a mockery of what he had neglected. He looked around the tiny room, faded curtains, cracked walls, a tiny mattress on the floor, and realized that his success had come at the cost of their suffering. But something shifted in that moment. Amma's pain, though deep, was no longer just rage. It was the voice of regret, of years lost to silence and waiting. She didn't push him out. She didn't scream. She simply looked at him and said, "You can't undo the past, but don't come here pretending to be a hero. If you truly want to make things right, it starts with being present, not for me, but for Kwami." Chuka nodded slowly, his heart aching. He had faced corporate wars, dealt with betrayal from partners, and survived economic crashes, but nothing had ever made him feel this hollow. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling, hearing Amma's voice on repeat. And for the first time in years, he prayed. Not for success, not for protection, but for a second chance to be a father. The next morning, Chuka arrived at the compound with a suitcase full of cash. It wasn't pride. It was desperation, the only language he had known for fixing things since he became wealthy. He handed the case to Amma at the front door, explaining softly, "This is not to buy your forgiveness. It's to make life easier. For Kwami." Amma opened the suitcase, stared at the stacks of naira, then slowly shut it. "Do you think this is what I wanted from you all these years?" she asked quietly. "You think money can fill the nights I stayed up nursing our child with a fever? Or the shame I carried every time someone whispered I was foolish to believe in you?" Her voice didn't rise, but the weight in her tone hit harder than any yell. Chuka swallowed hard. He realized then that the pain he caused wasn't something money could clean. "I don't want your guilt money," Amma continued, pushing the suitcase back toward him. "Kwami needs a school with good teachers, not flashy shoes. He needs a father who teaches him respect, not someone who bribes their way into his life." Her words weren't meant to shame him. They were a reflection of truth, raw and unpolished. Chuka felt exposed. For years, he had used money to shield himself from emotions, to control outcomes. But Amma wasn't like the others. She wasn't impressed by the empire he had built because she knew him before the empire. She had loved the man behind the ambition, the boy who once stole flowers from a park to make her smile. And now, standing in her compound in expensive clothes, surrounded by poverty he had escaped, Chuka finally understood that real wealth had nothing to do with money. It was about loyalty, presence, love, and the promises you keep. That evening, Chuka returned the suitcase to his SUV and came back empty-handed, except for a notebook and pen. He sat beside Kwami and asked, "Can I help you with your homework?" Amma watched from the doorway, arms folded. Kwami beamed and handed him his math assignment. It was a simple moment, one that didn't require cash, gifts, or grand gestures. And yet, it felt monumental. For the first time, Chuka was not acting from guilt, but from love. Not from obligation, but from responsibility. And Amma, though still guarded, allowed herself to watch them with a small, cautious glimmer of hope. Because even though wounds take time to heal, sometimes the simplest acts of presence can begin the process. Chuka didn't need to buy back their love. He needed to earn it, one consistent day at a time. Amma never asked for proof. She didn't need it. She knew from the moment Kwami started forming words that he had Chuka's cadence, his stubbornness, even his crooked smile when nervous. But Chuka, overwhelmed with guilt and responsibility, wanted to be absolutely sure. Not because he doubted her, but because something inside him needed a tangible truth to hold on to. He arranged for a discreet DNA test through a private clinic in Accra. He didn't tell Amma or Kwami. One afternoon, he convinced the boy to come with him to see a friend. Kwami, curious and cheerful, agreed. They played word games in the car, shared plantain chips, and arrived at the clinic where a kind nurse took swabs gently, telling Kwami it was just for fun. Chuka held the boy's hand the entire time, wondering how many more of these moments he had missed. 3 days later, the results arrived. Chuka opened the envelope alone in his hotel room. His hands trembled. The paper confirmed what his heart already knew, 99.9% paternal match. Kwami was his son. The knowledge hit him like a storm and a sunrise all at once. It validated the bond he was slowly building, and it also amplified the pain of what he had lost. 15 years of birthdays, first words, first steps, school awards, all gone, unrecoverable. He sat in silence, holding the result, wondering how he could ever explain to his son that he wasn't absent because he didn't care, but because he had been a coward. That night, he drafted a letter to Amma and then tore it up. Words on paper weren't enough anymore. He had to show it, to her, to Kwami, and to himself. The next morning, he went to the house as usual. But this time, he didn't go straight to Kwami. He asked Amma for a few minutes alone. She agreed reluctantly. They sat in the same spot under the mango tree, where the roots were tangled like their history. Chuka handed her the DNA result. She scanned it briefly, then folded it back. "I already knew," she said. "I just wanted to see when you would." There was no triumph in her voice, no satisfaction, only quiet truth. Chuka nodded. "I needed to see it, not to confirm you, but to confirm myself." He looked up at her. "He's mine. I know that now. And not just by blood, but by duty." Amma looked away, her face unreadable. "Then don't just say it, Chuka. Be it." As he turned to walk toward Kwami, the boy ran up and grabbed his hand. "Daddy," he said with a grin. And in that moment, no paper mattered more than the small fingers wrapped around his. Back in Nigeria, Chuka's carefully curated life began to unravel. He had delayed returning longer than expected, and Olana, his wife, grew suspicious. She had long learned to overlook his frequent trips, but this time was different. He was distant, emotionally unavailable, and no longer eager to talk about their future. One evening, while seated in their lavish Lekki penthouse, she confronted him. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked plainly, her wine glass trembling slightly in her grip. Chuka exhaled. It would have been easier if the answer was yes. But this wasn't infidelity in the conventional sense. It was something deeper, more threatening to their carefully built image. "I have a son," he said quietly. Silence fell between them like a hammer. "From the past. Before you." He explained everything. Amma, the bracelet, the child he never knew existed. As he spoke, Olana's expression shifted from confusion to rage, then to something colder, betrayal masked in indifference. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline. "You lied by omission," she said after several minutes. "You let me believe we couldn't have children, when all this time you had one out there." Chuka tried to explain that he didn't know, that Amma never reached him, that he had never meant for any of this to happen. But Olana wasn't interested in excuses. She turned to him, eyes blazing. You built a brand off honesty, mentorship, and values. What will your board say when this comes out? What will the press say? You think they'll care that you were young and confused? No. They'll say you abandoned a woman, a child, a promise. Her words were venom-coated in truth. Chuka realized then that his past wasn't just affecting his present. It was threatening his entire empire. That night, they slept in separate rooms for the first time in their marriage. Chuka couldn't eat. He stared at the lion head bracelet's twin, the one he had kept all these years. It no longer symbolized family legacy. It was a mirror reflecting his deepest failures. He held it tightly, remembering the moment he gave its pair to Amma, how sincere he had felt. Somewhere between ambition and avoidance, he had shattered every promise that mattered. Now, he was a man standing in the ruins of his own life, trying to rebuild not just a relationship with his son, but also the person he once was. Olana's threat hung heavy in the air: public scandal, boardroom politics, reputational loss. But strangely, Chuka felt peace. Because for the first time in years, he was doing something not for optics, but for redemption. And if the world turned against him for being a father, then maybe it was a world he no longer wanted to impress. The following week, Chuka found himself standing before his board of directors. They were expecting a briefing on expansion plans into East Africa. Instead, he told them the truth. Not the scandalized version, not a spin, just the truth. He shared that years ago, before his company even existed, he had left someone behind. A woman, a child, a promise. I didn't know about the child until recently, he confessed. But now that I do, I intend to be in his life, regardless of what it costs. There was a stunned silence. Some members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked intrigued, as if already thinking of PR angles. Only one woman, the oldest among them, nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. Are you asking for leave, resignation, or mercy? Someone asked coldly. Chuka straightened his back. I'm asking for none. Just your awareness. I'm still the same man who built this from nothing. But I won't keep pretending my personal life is spotless. I won't sacrifice my son's future for a clean press release. Later that day, headlines began to surface. Billionaire admits to abandoning family. Chuka MBA confesses to secret son in Ghana. Social media exploded. While some praised his honesty and transparency, others dragged his name through the mud. Think pieces, podcasts, gossip blogs, they all had their say. Olana, in her fury, granted an exclusive interview to a lifestyle magazine where she painted herself as a betrayed wife and hinted at divorce. She even suggested that Amma had schemed to trap Chuka with a child. That was the final straw for Amma. She called Chuka, her voice trembling with quiet fury. I don't want to be part of your circus. You brought cameras into our lives. My son sees his face on the internet and hears classmates whispering. I didn't ask for this. Chuka apologized again, but Amma's words were laced with finality. Fix it, Chuka, or don't come back. Chuka made a decision. He flew back to Ghana the next morning, not with reporters or assistants, but alone. He went straight to the school, spoke to the principal, and ensured Kwami's records were updated privately. He met with a lawyer and created a trust in Kwami's name, silent, off the books. Then he bought a modest apartment nearby and began living simply, away from the spotlight. When Amma found out, she was stunned. You left your mansion? She asked. I left my mask, he replied. For the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. Not guilt, not showmanship, but genuine resolve. He wasn't there to fix things with a check. He was there to show up every day, to take Kwami to school, to help cook dinner, to be part of their normal, messy life. And slowly, Amma began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't vanish this time. One quiet evening, the sky bathed in twilight and the breeze humming with memories, Amma invited Chuka to sit with her in the backyard. Kwami had fallen asleep early after an exhausting day at school, and for the first time in weeks, they were alone without the tension of unspoken expectations. Amma poured 2 cups of hibiscus tea, her eyes soft but guarded. Do you remember the rooftop? She asked. Chuka smiled faintly. Where we used to watch the sunset and talk about owning the world. She nodded. We were so young. We thought love was enough. He looked at her, this time not as a woman he had wronged, but as the strongest person he had ever known. It should have been, he replied. But I wasn't strong enough. Amma didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, you broke something in me, Chuka. Not just my heart. My trust. He reached for the bracelet she once wore, now worn by their son. When I gave you this, I meant every word. I wasn't lying. I really thought I'd come back. Amma nodded. But you didn't. And that's the part that haunts me. Not that you left, but that you forgot. Chuka's throat tightened. I didn't forget you. I forgot how to be the man who deserved you. There was silence again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was healing. The kind of silence where two people breathe the same air and begin to understand that some wounds don't close with apologies, but with consistent presence. I don't love you the way I used to, Amma said softly. But I respect what you're becoming. Chuka blinked back tears. That meant more to him than any forgiveness. Because respect meant possibility, and he knew he had a long way to go. As the night deepened and crickets sang, Amma placed a blanket over Chuka's legs. Stay the night, she said. Not as a lover. Just stay. And so he did. He lay on a mat beside Kwami, watching his son breathe peacefully, wondering how many nights he had missed just like this. When he finally closed his eyes, it was the first time in years that sleep came without restlessness. Not because everything was fixed, but because he was finally facing the past without running. The road ahead was still long, and redemption had no shortcuts. But in that little room filled with faded walls and borrowed time, Chuka felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Home. The days following that night were unlike any Chuka had experienced in his entire life. He woke up to the sound of Kwami's sleepy murmur, the scraping of Amma's cooking spoon on an old aluminum pot, and birds chirping loudly, as if rehearsing a morning anthem. He was no longer a spectator in his son's life. He had stepped into the chaos, the mess, and the beauty of fatherhood. Every morning he walked Kwami to school, sometimes holding his lunchbox, and other times listening to the boy ramble about his teachers, classmates, or how he wanted to be both a pilot and an engineer. Because if one plane breaks, I'll build another. These walks were simple, yet deeply profound for Chuka. He found himself smiling more, laughing without checking a watch, and sitting under trees he never noticed before. In those quiet, everyday moments, he realized that being a father wasn't about grand gestures or inheritance. It was about showing up, about being there when your child needed someone to clap at their school recital or help explain a math problem they didn't understand. Chuka was amazed at how quickly Kwami trusted him again. The boy asked questions that made him reflect deeply. What was your favorite cartoon growing up? Did you ever fight with your own dad? Why did you come back for us? Every time Chuka answered, he felt like he was weaving a thread into a bond that had been torn before it could even begin. Sometimes his voice cracked. Sometimes he had no words. But every moment with Kwami was a healing salve to the years he had wasted. Amma watched from a distance. At first, she kept her heart guarded, unsure whether this was a temporary phase or the beginning of real transformation. But Chuka didn't waver. He helped with chores, attended Kwami's school meetings, and even spent time with the neighbors without trying to assert his status. One Saturday, Amma returned from the market to find Chuka and Kwami playing football with some street kids. He was barefoot, his white shirt stained with dust, laughing like a teenager. She leaned on the wall and watched him, not the billionaire, not the public figure, just Chuka, the boy she once fell in love with. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something beyond anger. She saw a man trying, not performing, trying. And slowly, very slowly, the ice around her heart began to thaw. It wasn't long before Kwami began to ask the harder questions, the ones Chuka dreaded, the ones that didn't come with easy answers. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Kwami looked up from his sketch pad and asked, "Why didn't you come back when you said you would?" Chuka's chest tightened. He knew this day would come, but the innocence in his son's voice made it feel like he was being judged in a courtroom he hadn't prepared for. He put the sketch pad down gently and faced Kwami. I wish I had a good answer, son. I wish I could tell you something that would make it all okay. But the truth is, I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to come back after leaving. Kwami looked at him silently, his eyes piercing. Did you forget about Mommy? That question shattered Chuka more than anything else. He shook his head. No, I never forgot her. I thought about her every single day. But I got caught up in chasing success, trying to build a life that I thought would impress the world. And, in doing that, I lost sight of what really mattered. I let my fear and my pride stop me from reaching out. I thought maybe she had moved on. I thought maybe she didn't want to hear from me. Kwami blinked slowly. But she waited. She tells me stories about you sometimes. Not bad ones. She said you were smart and kind and made her laugh. Chuka's throat tightened. He looked at his son, this beautiful boy full of honesty and strength, and whispered, She gave you all the good parts of me. Kwami got up, walked over, and hugged his father tightly. Chuka hadn't expected it. For a moment, he simply froze, overwhelmed by the gesture. Then he wrapped his arms around his son and held on as if trying to embrace all the years they had lost. I don't care about the past anymore, Kwami whispered. I just want you to stay. And that was the moment Chuka knew redemption wasn't found in apologies or press conferences. It was found in moments like this, when a child, after all the hurt and confusion, still chose to believe in you. That night, as he watched Kwami sleep peacefully, Chuka made a vow to himself. Not one tied to a bracelet or a promise made in passion, but one born from truth. He would never leave again, not even when it got hard. Especially not when it got hard. Meanwhile, in Lagos, the empire Chuka had built began to shake under the weight of his new reality. Investors were spooked. Some board members questioned his decision to stay in Ghana for so long. Rumors spread about mismanagement, emotional instability, and a potential divorce with Olana. Media outlets, once eager to feature him as a symbol of young African success, now picked apart his private life for clicks. One blog released grainy photos of him in a dusty neighborhood, playing with children, twisting it as a PR stunt gone wrong. Olana, bitter and wounded, had already filed for legal separation and hinted at demanding a large share of his assets. He abandoned his family for a street woman and her illegitimate son, she reportedly said to a gossip outlet. Chuka didn't respond. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to defend himself publicly. His lawyers urged him to return and contain the situation. Your brand is suffering, one said. Do you know how many companies are now reconsidering deals? But Chuka didn't flinch. If they're only interested in my story when it's polished and perfect, they can keep their deals, he said. I built this company to solve problems, not to hide from them. The board pushed back. A few key stakeholders demanded his resignation as CEO, citing conflicting priorities. One even suggested that he wasn't thinking straight due to emotional entanglements. But Chuka remained calm. He stepped down voluntarily, not out of defeat, but to reclaim his life. In a press statement he wrote, I'm proud of what we built, but if I must choose between maintaining an image and being a present father, I choose the latter. Every time. Back in Ghana, Chuka didn't tell Amma immediately. When she found out from a friend who had seen the statement online, she walked into the room where he sat, reading with Kwami. You left your own company? She asked, stunned. He looked up and smiled faintly. It was never mine. It was always theirs. I just gave it my name. Amma sat down slowly, unsure of what to feel. For so long, she had believed that men like Chuka never changed. That once they climbed the ladder, they forgot the ones who helped them up. But here he was, a man who gave it all up, not for her, not for applause, but for truth. She watched him kiss Kwami's forehead and return to the book. And for the first time in 15 years, she whispered quietly to herself, maybe the lion didn't forget. Maybe he just got lost. The morning Amma told Chuka she was leaving Accra felt like the sun refused to rise. It wasn't the kind of goodbye that came with yelling or accusations. It was silent, weighted, and painfully mature. She sat across from him at the wooden table, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic cup. "There's a teaching job in Kumasi," she said softly. Kwami got admitted to a good private school, one that offered him a scholarship. They don't know who his father is, just that he scored highest in their entrance test. Chuka looked at her, searching her face for a hint that she was joking. But she wasn't. She had made her decision. "I need to start over somewhere that doesn't whisper behind my back," she continued. "I want Kwami to grow in peace, not as the boy connected to scandal or a name with baggage." Chuka felt the air leave his lungs. After everything, the apologies, the tears, the rebuilding, she was leaving. "Can I come with you?" he asked, voice cracking. Amma looked down. "You can visit. But this next chapter isn't about us, Chuka. It's about me finding who I am again, outside of waiting. I've been in limbo for 15 years, stuck in the shadow of a man I loved, and a future that never came." Her words weren't angry. They were honest, and that made them harder to hear. Kwami entered the room moments later, holding a drawing he had made, a picture of himself between his parents, holding both their hands. "I want to frame it," he said with a bright smile. Chuka took the picture and kissed his son's forehead. "It's perfect," he whispered, even though his heart was breaking inside. The day they left, the neighborhood gathered to say goodbye. Chuka stood beside the car, helping them pack. He handed Kwami a new school bag and Amma a small envelope, not cash, but a letter. "Read it when you're ready," he said. Amma nodded. When the door closed and the engine started, Kwami rolled down the window. "You'll visit, right?" Chuka smiled and said, "Every chance I get." As the car pulled away, he stood alone on the dusty street, clutching the twin of the lion head bracelet, the one he had once intended to wear beside hers. He didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because, for the first time, he was letting go without bitterness. Amma wasn't punishing him. She was reclaiming her own story. And Kwami wasn't losing a father. He was gaining one who finally knew how to stay, even from afar. 2 years passed. Chuka never returned to corporate life, but he found new purpose in quieter places. He began mentoring local startups anonymously, using a different name. He taught in tech boot camps, offering guidance to young men who reminded him of himself, ambitious, reckless, and hungry. His wealth remained, but it no longer defined him. Every month, he traveled to Kumasi to see Kwami. Sometimes they went hiking. Sometimes they just sat in silence. Kwami grew taller, bolder, wiser. Each time Chuka visited, he brought a new book, and each time, Kwami had read the last one completely. The boy was becoming something beautiful, a blend of Amma's resilience and Chuka's brilliance. The two bracelets, once separated by time and betrayal, now rested side by side in a small wooden box that Kwami kept in his room. "These remind me that people can change," he once said. Amma, now a respected educator in Kumasi, had found her rhythm again. She didn't remarry, not because she closed her heart, but because she was full of growth, fulfillment, and a peace that wasn't tied to anyone else. Her students adored her. Parents requested her by name. She still wore her hair in simple braids and kept a quiet grace about her. She and Chuka spoke often now, without tension. Their conversations were about Kwami, about life, about how time doesn't heal all wounds, but presence can. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they said nothing. But there was no more bitterness, just understanding. One afternoon, during Chuka's visit, Amma looked at him as Kwami played in the distance. "You've changed," she said quietly. Chuka nodded. "I had to," he replied. "I saw the man I could have been, and I couldn't live with him anymore." One day, during Kwami's 12th birthday, Chuka gave him a gift wrapped in blue cloth. Inside was a simple chain, with both lion head bracelets joined together. "When you're ready," he said, "you can separate them again, or keep them as one." Kwami's eyes widened. "It's like putting the past and present together?" Chuka nodded. "Exactly." Amma watched silently, her heart swelling. The boy hugged his father tightly, and for the first time in a long time, Chuka felt like everything, the success, the loss, the regret, had led him exactly where he needed to be. He hadn't rewritten history, but he had changed its ending. He was no longer the man who ran. He was the man who returned, the man who remembered. the man who chose love over legacy. And that, more than any title, made him whole again. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.